In the darkness of the night at the Grand Hospital, the faint smell of medicine mingled with the reigning silence. Whenever a cool breeze blew by, the window panes in the ward would let out a squeaking sound. Lying on a bed in that small room was a 46-year-old woman. Her name was Mary. Mary and her husband, Arthur, had 2 children. Their eldest daughter had just passed her high school matriculation exams the previous year, while their younger son was still attending high school. As for their family's assets, all they owned were 12 acres of farmland, 6 pigs, and 1 cow back in their village. This modest wealth was their entire lifeline, the sole foundation of hope for their children's future. However, fate had not been kind to their little family. A lump had formed in Mary's brain, and the doctors suspected it might be cancer, which is why she was now admitted to this major hospital. At night, when the hospital grew quiet, hushed arguments could often be heard between the couple. "Arthur, let's just go back to the village. If we stay here, we won't have any money left to spend. Even the savings we kept for the children's education will be gone. I'm someone who is going to die anyway. I don't want to waste money for nothing," Mary said, her voice trembling and her eyes welling with tears. Arthur held his wife's frail, thin hand tightly. "You can't go back, Mary. You're not going to have any serious illness. I will sell everything I have to cure you. Money can always be earned back. If you're not here, how will the kids and I go on? We have to stay. The doctors will perform the surgery," he replied firmly. In his eyes, his deep affection for his wife and the sheer terror of losing her were vividly clear. Not too far from the patient ward, in a corner of the hospital corridor, there was a public payphone that required a calling card. In this day and age, where almost everyone had a mobile phone, hardly anyone used that old public phone. Downstairs, there was a small shop that sold phone cards. Every evening as dusk fell, Arthur would rush over to that phone. He was calling their home in the village. Arthur's voice on the phone was quite loud. Even if he made sure to close the ward door, Mary and the other patients and caregivers in the room could hear his voice clearly. "Hey boy, yeah, it's me. Did you feed the cow? Did you feed the pigs properly? Make sure the compound gates are securely locked," Arthur would ask loudly. Then he would carefully add, "Your mother doesn't have any serious illness. Just stay happy, we'll be discharged in 3 or 4 days and come back home." Whenever he heard those words, a faint smile would appear on Mary's face as she lay on the bed, looking visibly relieved. For her worried and anxious heart, that phone call was the only soothing medicine she had. It was now the 4th day since they arrived at the hospital. Today was the day Mary was scheduled for her brain surgery. On the morning of the operation, Mary's older brother and younger sister arrived from the village. Anxiety hung heavily in the small hospital room. Mary held on tightly to her younger sister, who was standing beside the bed, yet her eyes never strayed for even a second from her husband Arthur's face. Her eyes were entirely filled with affection, worry, and a desperate plea. Just before being taken into the operating room, just before the anesthesia was administered, Mary suddenly gathered her strength and grabbed Arthur's arm. "Husband," her voice trembled as tears streamed down her cheeks, If I don't make it off this operating table alive, just bury me in the woods behind our house. There's no need to hold a grand funeral. Please, don't waste any money. Just this once. Please listen to me this one time." Hearing those words, Arthur's heart tightened painfully. Choking back his tears, he replied with a lump in his throat, "All right, please don't worry about any of that. I won't let anything happen to you." Then the doctors injected a clear liquid into Mary's veins. Soon after, her eyelids slowly grew heavy and she drifted off into unconsciousness. Watching this scene, the muscles on Arthur's face became incredibly tense. The nurses wheeled Mary away toward the operating theater. Arthur, along with her brother and sister, followed closely behind. When they reached the front of the operating room, the heavy doors closed. A moment later, Mary's brother pulled Arthur away, guiding him back to the waiting area. Arthur couldn't sit still. He would sit down on a chair and immediately stand back up, hopelessly restless. One of his hands gripped the edge of the chair so tightly it looked as if it might break.
"Brother, Mary's surgery, it will be successful, right?
Arthur asked Mary's brother, staring at him desperately for reassurance. At that moment, the look on his face mirrored that of a helpless little child. "The doctor already said nothing bad will happen, so it will be fine. Don't worry, Arthur," the brother said, patting Arthur's shoulder to comfort him. Yet deep inside, both men were burning with anxiety like roaring flames. About 20 minutes later, Arthur suddenly stood up from his chair and paced back toward the operating room. A whirlwind of thoughts was spinning in his head, making it impossible for him to sit or stand still. Shortly after, Mary's brother had to fetch him and make him sit back down in the waiting area. He repeated this cycle 5 or 6 times, standing up, pacing to the operating room doors to peek, and being pulled back by his brother-in-law. For him, time seemed to crawl so slowly that it felt like the whole world had stopped spinning. Finally, the doors to the theater opened, and doctors and nurses pushed the stretcher carrying Mary out of the room. Mary's entire head was heavily wrapped in layers of white bandages. Her face was as pale and bloodless as a sheet, and her eyes were softly closed. Aside from her faint, gentle breathing, she looked exactly like a small child in a deep slumber. Arthur rushed over to help and carefully transferred Mary back onto the bed in her hospital room. Once everything was settled, he quickly hurried out of the room. A short while later, he returned carrying a bag of food. Usually, Arthur was incredibly frugal with money, often settling his meals with the cheapest option, 2 or 3 plain steamed buns with no filling. But this time, he had bought plenty of large, hot steamed buns generously stuffed with meat and fillings. "Brother, sister, I bought some meat buns here. You must be starving. Please eat as much as you'd like," he generously offered to Mary's siblings. He himself took 2 buns and slowly swallowed them down with a cup of hot tea. A look of slight relief could be seen washing over him. That evening, unusually, Arthur did not go downstairs to call the house in the village. Whether he simply forgot or if there was another reason, only he truly knew. Throughout that entire night, the lights in the small hospital ward remained brightly lit. Until midnight, Arthur did not sleep. Instead, he sat on the small stool at the head of Mary's bed. Like a stone statue, he sat perfectly still, staring unblinkingly at his sleeping wife's face. Listening to the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the simple realization that she was still alive felt like the greatest reward life could ever give him. The next afternoon, Mary finally regained consciousness and woke up. Though she couldn't speak yet, due to the lingering effects of the anesthesia and the toll of the surgery, she offered a weak smile when she saw Arthur sitting beside her. Seeing that smile, Arthur was so overjoyed he didn't know what to do, repeatedly rubbing his hands in pure relief. He then ran downstairs and bought a large amount of sweet candies. He took the candies to the doctor's lounge and handed them to each one. He went around to the nurse's station and distributed them there too. Finally, he went around to the neighboring beds in the ward, handing candies to the other patients and their caregivers, joyfully declaring, "My wife has woken up." His sheer happiness was contagious, spreading throughout the entire hospital room. Day by day, Mary's health improved remarkably. It was evident that the doctor's surgery had been a massive success. On the very day her oxygen mask was removed, Mary began to plead softly in her frail voice. "Arthur, let's go home. If we stay in the hospital, we'll spend too much money. The kids in the village must be so worried and lost without us. I feel much better now." Arthur coaxed her gently, as if soothing a child. "Oh, Mary, you're acting like a kid. The doctors will discharge you when it's time. I told you not to worry about the money. The kids are doing just fine in the village. Your speedy recovery is the only thing that matters." He then tried to distract her by recounting all the new and interesting things he had seen and heard downstairs in the hospital. Soon enough, everything returned to normal. As evening approached, Arthur left the ward and headed to the public payphone in the corridor to call the village. His voice on the phone was as loud as ever. Even with the door closed, Mary could hear him perfectly. "Hey, you only need to feed the cow once a day. It's winter now, so we don't have to use it for farm work.
It doesn't matter if it gets a little hungry, but make sure you feed the pigs really well. Once they reach a good weight, we can sell them for a great price. Your mom is recovering very fast. The doctor said we can be discharged in 3 or 4 days." While he was shouting loudly, a young girl who was looking after a patient in the neighboring bed walked near Arthur, and when she glanced at the phone, she clearly saw that there was no calling card inserted into the machine. "Uncle, there's no card in the phone," the girl warned her in surprise. But Arthur already knew perfectly well that there was no card. Panicking slightly, he quickly made a shh sound, placing his index finger over his lips to signal her to stay quiet. The girl looked at him, utterly confused, and whispered, "Arthur, aren't you worried about the cow and the pigs at home this time?" Arthur let out a soft sigh, lowered his head, and replied in a quiet whisper, "To pay for the surgery, I already had her sister sell the pigs and the cow long ago." At that moment, everything became clear. The phone calls Arthur had been making every day were never to his children back home. They were fake calls, calls of love, made with the sole intention of bringing peace of mind to his anxious, bedridden wife. Even though their lives were impoverished and difficult, the profound, gentle, and deep affection they held for one another had firmly planted a monument of love that would last a lifetime. Day by day, by supporting and caring for each other, they had caused the most beautiful and fragrant flower of love to bloom in this world. Though this little flower was simple and ordinary, its sweet fragrance would warmly touch the very soul of anyone who heard their story.